I guess we'll start. Is it working?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome. We were hoping for a bigger crowd, but it seems like, this is a good crowd. So we'll go ahead and proceed with this panel. This is the second day of a three-day event on the Muslims in the Mountain West project. For those of you who were here yesterday, you heard me introduce the project, and I'm not going to do that tonight, but I'll just say briefly that this is possible because of the collaboration of two centers that were given the grant by the Social Science Research Council in New York. That center is the Center for Media, Religion, and Culture, and the Center for Asian Studies here at the University of Colorado Boulder. And these 3 days events also are sponsored by another center, which is the ESLO Center for Journalism and New Media, and we are very pleased to have the director of that center, Lynn Schofield-Clark from DU, from the University of Denver. Thank you for coming. I won't say much about the project. For those of you yesterday who saw the website, there is plenty of information on muslimsinmountainwest.org. And you could find videos, you can find some background information about how the project started, and certainly some history about Muslims in this area. And we are going to be feeding that website as we go for another few months until the budget for this project really dries up, basically. I keep saying this is the last event in this project. It's never the last event. I keep doing more of these things. And I'm very happy tonight to have really a distinguished panel to talk about a very topical issue and very important issue about storytelling and the importance of storytelling for Muslims in America. And with that, I will turn it to our moderators, Sophia Shafi from the Iliff School of Theology in Denver, and take it away.
Welcome to this conversation on storytelling, the media, and Muslims in America. We are joined this evening by Wajahat Ali, playwright of the Domestic Crusaders. Mr. Ali has been described by one critic with these words: "He's a major new voice in American literature. His play is to Muslim American theater what A Raisin in the Sun is to African American theater." Many of us are also familiar with his blog, Goat Milk, an intellectual playground, his many articles for publications including The Guardian, The Huffington Post, and Slate, as well as his important work on the money machine behind Islamophobia in America. Our second panelist, Deana Nassar, is an attorney whose work on behalf of the United Nations brought her to Rome, where she focused on microfinance and agricultural sustainability in Africa. Ms. Nassar has been active in the Muslim American community for over 20 years. She is currently the Hollywood Liaison for the Muslim Public Affairs Council, where she works to improve the representation of Muslims in the entertainment media. And finally, our third panelist, Qasim Basir, is the director of the wonderful film Muslim, which will be screened tonight following the reception directly after this panel. His other projects include One Nation, Two Worlds, Glimpse, and the film series titled The Inspiration of Barak, Yes We Can. Mr. Basir's film, Muslim, is a beautiful meditation on the Muslim American experience, which I strongly recommend. I am Sophia Shafi, currently the visiting assistant professor at the Iliff School of Theology in Denver. My current project is a study of monstrous images of Muslim men from the medieval age to the present, and includes hybrid creatures, some of which are identified as both Jewish and Muslim, reflecting a cohabitation of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. We are here tonight to talk about issues of representation, and each of our panelists, in different and important ways, is contributing to an alternative discourse about Muslims, one that presents a fair account of what we believe, practice, experience, and feel. Each of our panelists will have 15 minutes in which they will have an opportunity to talk about their work and the issues represented in this session, after which we will take questions from the audience. As moderator, I must make a request that audience members please refrain from giving a khutbah or lecture and instead pose a question to our panel. I'm sure many of you will have wonderful questions, so let's all make sure as many of those questions as possible can be posed. And we will start in the order that I introduced, so we'll start with Mr. Ali.
Do I even need, can you guys hear me? This is fine, right? Yeah. I don't need to microphone. Come on. All right, thank you so much first and foremost for having me here. First time in Denver, Colorado. As a football fan, congratulations on getting a real quarterback. Well done. No disrespect to Tim Tebow, for those of you who are Tebow fans. It's really good to be here. You know, you kind of forget, Deana and I were talking about it, like, we were walking around Boulder, Colorado, and like, this feels like Boulder, Colorado. This looks exactly like I thought how Boulder, Colorado would look like. I stepped outside and there's mountains. I'm like, yes, Boulder. So it's a wonderful place, wonderful town. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you, Nabil. Thank you, Sophia, and thank you for that warm introduction. I like that. The check will be in the mail afterwards. And you have a really exciting topic here, a thesis topic, storytelling, media, and Muslims in America. And now we have to crack this nut in 40 minutes. Which we will. Give me 10 minutes, or how much time do we have? 5, 10 minutes?
I think 15.
You have 15 minutes.
15.
All right, I won't bore you for 15 minutes. Just we'll keep it quick. But there's a great quote. It's from a poet that says, "The universe is made of stories, not atoms." It's a great quotation, specifically talking about human beings. A new book came out that said that human being is the unique storytelling animal. According to evolution, science, and psychology, for whatever reason, we as human beings are hardwired to learn about ourselves, our culture, our identity through stories. In fact, corporations now are teaching their boards, their employees, storytelling techniques, because they said without a good story, there's no sale. No story, no sale. So for whatever reason, we as human beings invest in stories, okay? And Muslims are no different. Now, what I'm about to say might sound insane, but in the 7th century, the storyteller was valued more than the swordsman in the 7th century Arabia. Now, again, this is a town, a place, where raids were common. Tribes had to protect their assets, and there were almost friendly raids happening daily. And so you needed a swordsman not only for protection and security, but also to protect your resources. So in this time, 7th century, the storyteller was valued more than the swordsman. So much so that when a poet, who was the artist of the day, used to come through town, a poet who was famed, they would literally, I use this figuratively, hijack the poet. Right? Thank you. Hold on to that poet and say, you are staying here and you are not leaving until you perform. And what the poet used to do was in front of the community, much like this, the poet, through oratory, used to come up and relate the community's history, their identity, their past, their present, their future, their values, and their hopes. The storyteller was valued more than the swordsman. Now, the story of Muslim Americans right now in America, I mean, we are popular. I mean, Muslims, it is a happening time to be Muslim right now. It's awesome. Who wouldn't want to be Muslim? We have a Muslim president, if you haven't heard, Barack Hussein Obama, so Muslim that he's yet to step inside a mosque 4 years into his presidency. He's not, where's the camera? He's not Muslim. I'm just kidding. If Barack Hussein Obama is a Muslim, he is the worst Muslim of all time. The dude eats pork openly, bacon strips, he drinks alcohol, celebrates Easter, says Jesus Christ is a savior. I don't think has prayed ever, and you know, who knows what was happening in Pakistan? I kid. But 17% of registered voters, Americans, think Barack Hussein Obama is a Muslim. And just because he's a Muslim, they also think he is un-American. It's also a good time to be Muslim because we sell hummus now in Safeways. And Boulder's kind of a hip town, right? You guys have Whole Food? Oh, yeah. You and hummus are like this. The Muslim agenda is almost complete. Rachel Ray wears kefias and Dunkin' Donuts commercials. You guys remember that? Kefia is now a fashion statement. Thank you, Palestinians. What else do we have? We had a reality TV show, All American Muslim, that got canceled. And now we have the pinnacle of American culture, the pinnacle of reality TV, the Shahs of Sunset. You guys have heard about this? Okay, good. One person gave me a thumbs up. So things are looking good for Muslims. And that actually coincides with the reality of American Muslims. According to all the studies, and I actually wrote this down for you so you don't think I'm crazy. According to the recent Gallup and Pew polls and studies about American Muslims, they say that American Muslims are about 2.7, and the high estimate is 7 million. The average estimate comes about 4 million Muslim Americans, let's just say 3. So American Muslims, this is what they say according to the latest studies, are moderate, whatever that means, but that's a good word. Let's run with it. Moderate, uniquely optimistic about America's future. They believe in the American dream. They are economically successful. They renounce extremism and violence against civilians. They help law enforcement. And currently they are the most diverse religious community in America. Here's some more good news. American Muslim women are the most educated women of a religious community right behind Jewish American women. That's good news, right? But because we're talking about Muslims, there's never good news. There's always bad news lurking right around the corner. So here comes the bad news, the shoe drops. Here is the perception, all right, of American Muslims. That was the reality. Here is the perception. The perception is Islam has the lowest favorability rating of any religion in America, the lowest ever in its history, even lower than the month following 9/11. So let that sink in for a second. Okay. A third of America don't want Muslim as president. Too late. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. He's not Muslim. A third of Americans don't want a Muslim as president. A similar number don't want a Muslim sitting on the Supreme Court. 40% of Americans say they don't want Muslims as their neighbors. In the summer, they did a poll, and no offense to Republicans here, over nearly half of Republican voters in Alabama and Mississippi thought that Barack Hussein Obama was a Muslim, and as such was anti-American, as I said, and 17% of Americans still think Barack Hussein Obama, who's not Muslim, is a Muslim and not American. FBI says there is a 50% increase in hate crimes against Muslims. That's the FBI statistic from this year. Southern Poverty Law Center, that does a great survey on hate groups, has said there is a 300% increase in anti-Muslim hate groups, specifically 30 groups now. In the last year, there was 10. They have done recent studies about bullying in schools. And what they've shown is that for the first time, according to the studies, kids are being bullied specifically for being Muslim. Okay? And for those of you who've been following, the Associated Press won the Pulitzer this year, did a great series starting from last year, which said that NYPD had a widespread surveillance of American Muslim communities based purely on race and religion. And just last month, the NYPD said as a result of this multi-million-dollar, multi-year-long, widespread surveillance of communities, of students, including honor students, students at Columbia University, mosques, that they found nothing. So American Muslims who have been here for 300 years, in fact, the first slave ships, they say a third of the slaves who were brought here forcibly against their will were Muslim. Okay, that's 30%. The story of American Muslims is as old as America itself, and yet Muslims are not seen as neighbors, they're still seen as suspects. The story of American Muslims is being told to Muslims by others. American Muslims are not the protagonists of their narrative. In fact, they seem to be the antagonist of America's narratives. They're not even the sidekick. I mean, one would hope that we would be Haji Baba, or like Sulu, or Kato, or Tonto, who, by the way, are awesome, okay, deserve their own series, but they're not even sidekicks. In fact, and this is a problem of American Muslim communities, they're not only the antagonist, not only they're not the sidekick, but they're in danger of being marginalized and silenced. Why? A statistic came out in 2002, that said there are 4 professions that about 90 to 91% of American Muslims belong to. All right, want to guess? All right, here we go. Let's see how well you know your American Muslim neighbor. There is a holy trinity of American Muslim occupations that matches most immigrant populations. The worth of your child increases. Doctor, very good. First is doctor. This is a hip crowd, Boulder. All right, very hip. First is doctor. Second's engineer. Third? Lawyer. No. Dubious businessman who somehow makes a lot of money and buys a nice car and a suburban home. Businessman. And fourth, not lawyer. Lawyers started after 2002. The fourth one, and I'm not saying as a joke, is those in the car service industry, taxi cab industry. So while 91% of American Muslims about 10 years ago belonged to those four occupations, which leaves a whopping 10% for politicians, lawyers, teachers, lowly teachers, artists, lowly artists, directors, journalists, storytellers, social workers, and volunteers. And again, think about storytelling. Think about who writes the stories. It's usually that 10% that American Muslims do not invest in. So as a result, what we see is a vast difference between the perception and the reality. How am I on time?
Oh, you're fine.
5 more minutes?
Yes.
Okay, am I boring you guys? Are you guys with us?
Keep
All right.
going.
Perception, reality, okay? Two underlying core reasons why there is, for the term that I like to describe, Islamophobia. I know it's a mouthful. For those of you who don't know, I did do a research project with the Center for American Progress. It's called Fear Incorporated, the Roots of the Islamophobia Industry in America. A 6-month investigation came out last year where we tracked the rise of Islamophobia, Islamophobic groups, Islamophobic rhetoric, Islamophobic memes in the past 10 years, traced it to a $43 million cottage industry. And Islamophobia does exist. The two underlying core reasons for this vast gap between perception and reality is the following. Number one, ignorance. 62 to 63% of Americans say they don't know a Muslim. Let that number sink in. So there's not really deep-seated malice. This is a key thing to know. Americans don't have a deep-seated innate hatred of Muslims or Islam. It's inaccurate to assume that your American neighbor just goes around hating Muslims. They just don't know. Ignorance. The second reason is misperceptions and misconceptions. I know this sounds cliche, but people who don't know about Muslims say they get their information mainly from the media. The information they do get about Muslims and Islam from the media, according to all the studies, is overwhelmingly negative, rooted in sensationalism, violence, wars, honor killings, terrorism. So in this vacuum, the story is being painted with monochromatic colors of violence and extremism. Terrorism, taxi cab driver. In fact, we wish there would be more taxi cab driver stories, but that's the narrative. It gets filled in with this bubble. And the third one, we have to acknowledge the reality of 9/11. 2 towers fell, brought down by 19 foreign hijackers. There's also tremendous fear. So you get fear, you get ignorance, you get misperceptions, and you have a what's it called, the Molotov cocktail? You have a Molotov cocktail. And we can go in it in the Q&A, but you guys have been witnessing the rage, quote unquote, the rage over what's been happening over this documentary, The Innocence of Muslims. Extremists beget extremism. People with extremist agendas made that movie deliberately, intentionally, to provoke this type of response. Unfortunately, certain extremists, a minute number in countries like Libya and Egypt, responded exactly the way the filmmakers had hoped for. A local issue became a national issue, became an international controversy, where people have died, and it's become a diplomatic issue. So this also now threatens our national security. Now, real quick, I want to do I have 2 more minutes?
Yes, you do.
Okay. Are you guys cool? All right. You guys with me? All right. All right, good. No. No, check it out. There's a history here. Again, this doesn't exist in a vacuum. I mentioned 9/11 because 9/11, for better or worse, is seared into the consciousness not only of America, but the globe. For American Muslims, you can actually have a fork in the timeline. Pre-9/11, post-9/11. And here we sit 11 years after 9/11, and my generation, I was about to turn 21 when it happened, a senior at UC Berkeley. We had hoped 10 years later, we'd be talking about the post-9/11. Yet we still see the iconography, the imagery, the rhetoric, more so than now, dominate the discourse of 9/11. Okay? So it doesn't exist in a vacuum, and there's a history of this misperception of Islam and Muslims in the quote-unquote West. I'm going to give you a quick historical background of how misperception and propaganda is tied to media and politics. Okay, very quick, I'm going to try to do it in 2 minutes. Believe it or not, Muslims and Christians had relatively favorable relations, favorable trades back in the day. Specifically the 11th century, there was 1095, Pope Urban II commissioned the crusades against the infidels. At this point, the infidel was the conquering Muslims, right? Now, it was done less for religious reasons, as we know. Historically, it was done more for political reasons. And yet, what we see now, in the 11th century, and it's no coincidence, is we see the poem Song of Roland. Anyone heard about it? It's a staple in Western lit classes. If anyone was an English major, you probably would have read it. The Song of Roland is an 11th century poem, rendering in verse an 8th century battle, seen as a masterpiece of epic drama, in which it relates how Muslims slaughtered 20,000 soldiers in Charlemagne's army in medieval Spain. And Roland, the emperor's nephew, was slain in the battle. Charlemagne then exacts revenge, and there's a glorious comeback, and he takes revenge against the Muslim barbarians. Except that this did not happen. The real battle was in 8th century, 778. The killers were not Muslims, but were Christian Basques, who were actually furious at Charlemagne for pillaging the city of Pamplona. At the time, Muslims had good terms with Christians. But we see the Crusades, and you see now propaganda emerge within the art and culture and media discourse, the Song of Roland. Fast forward. Anyone know about the Divine Comedy? Everyone knows about Divine Comedy, right? One of the, again, staples of Western literature. Italians say that it is one of the creme de la creme, piece de resistance of Italian art, a pinnacle of the Renaissance period written by Dante, where Dante takes us on a journey from hell to purgatory to heaven. In hell, Dante makes a pit stop, and there is someone who is being tortured in hell, who happens to be the Prophet Muhammad, 14th century now. And I'm going to quote him. It's in Dante's Inferno, Canto 28, verse 30. How mutilated see is Muhammad. In front of me doth Ali weeping go, cleft in the face from forelock unto chin. Not a good depiction. Fast forward 18th century. Things will get better, right? Wrong. Voltaire. I love Voltaire. Who doesn't love Voltaire? Voltaire didn't like Islam or Muslims too much. Voltaire, who we all love, wrote a play in 1736 called, quote, Fanaticism of Muhammad the Prophet. All right? Fast forward to the 20th century, the rise of the cinema. Okay, we're going to see some good stuff happening. 1920s, Rudolph Valentino's The Sheikh. Still not good. Arabs are seen as barbarous, licentious perverts, auctioning off women and slaves. All right? Fast forward, in the 70s, coinciding with the OPEC crisis, coinciding with 1979, something happened in 1979. Anyone? Bueller? Anyone? Iranian Revolution. Iron Sheikh. Anyone know Iron Sheikh? Hulk Hogan's nemesis, right? WWF, right? 5 pop cultural points for anyone who knew the Iron Sheikh's finishing move. Sad Boulder. The camel clutch. The camel clutch. In the 70s, the bad guys were Arabs. If you look at the cartoons in the 70s, the Saudis and Arabs were seen as corpulent, obese, hook-nosed, beady eyes. All right? For those of you who study anti-Semitism in America, when you put those cartoons side by side, exactly the same depiction of Jews in early 20th century America. Corpulent, obese, scheming, not to be trusted. 1979, the bad guy became Iranians. Okay? 1980s, a glorious period. I grew up in the 80s. And I loved 80s movies. Chuck Norris movies, loved them. But then you go back and see these movies and go, oh my God, this was pretty damn racist. Because Chuck Norris travels to Middle Eastern foreign lands and kills swaths of angry brown people, right? The terrorists, the angry people, the enemies were Libyans and Palestinians. And basically a melange of brownness, Arabness, Middle Easternness. It was so bad that even Back to the Future, I love Back to the Future. Randomly in the beginning of Back to the Future, Libyans. Marty McFly and Doc are escaping Libyans who are angry, and they shoot down Doc McFly, and then Marty has to go back. No, they shoot down Doc, and Marty has to go back, and he warns Doc, and he lives, right? But all of a sudden you're watching, you're like, oh my God, these are some belligerent, crazy Arabs. Down and out of Beverly Hills, you had the Iranian with 12 wives, all in niqab, who didn't speak a word. Father of the Bride 2, in the 90s, same thing, the caricature of the perverted Iranian or the perverted Arab sheikh. True Lies, you guys remember True Lies? So the enemy was not necessarily Muslim, but anything Arab and Middle Eastern. 9/11 happens, and the enemy now becomes Islam. It becomes a civilizational war, right? So now it merges in this big tent between the West, whatever that means, versus Islam, whatever that means. And Islam includes not only Muslims, but those who look Muslim. This includes Arab Christians, this includes Iranian Jews, and recently, according to the tragedy, if you guys have been following, this also includes Sikhs and Hindus. And if you look at all the statistics, hate crimes are being experienced by all of them. So then the question goes, who are the storytellers? And it seems, and I'm going to end on a positive note, and I've talked for too long, even though I was supposed to talk for 5 minutes, forgive me, Deana, forgive me, Sophia, forgive me, Qasim, is that 9/11 also experienced what I call a small renaissance in the American Muslim cultural space. We're experiencing a small cultural renaissance amongst American Muslim communities. And it's no joke, it shouldn't be seen as a surprise, because when you look at the two major ingredients of art, it's usually love and pain, which go hand in hand. I would say the two groups who we owe a great debt as Americans are Jewish Americans and African Americans. If you really look at people who've been vanguards in plays, in theater, in movies, in narratives, in art, African Americans, Jewish Americans. Tremendous suffering. And tremendous suffering inspires an artistic response. And what we noticed after 9/11, American Muslim communities, is a small bubble where engineers and doctors and lawyers left those professions. We saw them emerge in the field of stand-up comedy. We saw people become graphic novelists. Willow Wilson, a good friend of mine, is from Boulder, Colorado, Muslim woman. First American Muslim female who is a comic book writer for DC Comics. Her book, Iliff, is now a major book, fictional book, graphic novelist. We see guys like Qasim, Q Basir, become Q, right? I know Qasim, right? I don't know, you said Q, I don't want to.
No, it's Qasim.
Yeah, all right, Qasim, we see Qasim emerge as filmmakers. We see a guy like me who's an attorney do plays. We see people now saying, you know what, we need to identify and tell our stories, because if we don't tell our stories will be told to us by others, right? And that's what's happening for many American Muslims. Our stories are being told to us by others. And what we're also witnessing is an evolution of the American Muslim storyteller. For many ethnic minority groups, the first step is stories that are by us for us. So, we want to empower our own communities. We want to exist in this cocoon. What we're now witnessing is stories that are by us for everyone. Stories that are by us for everyone. And that's what I seek to do with my storytelling. Stories that are by us, it's authentic, it's legitimate, it's real, it's honest, it's empowering, but at the same time it's for a global, multicultural audience, right? And what we're realizing now, especially as we've seen with the innocence of Muslims, and what we've seen of, again, we see these troubling headlines, and the news we cover. You know, the rage boys, the angry Muslim, why they hate us. Oh, look, a Muslim condemned violence, they're still in the minority. Still this very careless, reckless, simplistic, ignorant, and actually incorrect narrative being framed by the mainstream media. It's very depressing when you fast forward 10 years from now, you're like, oh my God, we're still dealing with the same baggage. But again, it's up to American Muslims, our generation, the onus is on us to, and I quote Public Enemy, bum rush the show, right? Because no one's going to give you the mic, right? You have to grab the conch, and sometimes you have to make your own conch and enter the space. And that's how media has really helped, new media, the blogosphere, Twitter, Facebook, where a Facebook post goes global within an upload. And you just cannot ignore it anymore. And I've been in that space of media. Also, when it comes to storytelling, there is a realization that, oh wow, in a globalized market, there's much money to be had from the Muslim dollar. Because what I've seen in my experience in Hollywood and New York, the one color that trumps all colors is the color green. Right? That's all that matters. So if you had a story about like unicorns playing chess, and all the kids like unicorns playing chess, I don't know, I'm just making it up, right? You will see a whole bunch of movies about unicorns playing chess, even though it sounds crazy, right? And so right now I think there is a need for American Muslim storytellers, and right now I think there is a realization that in American Muslim communities, we need to emerge as protagonists of our own narrative. Because right now we're the antagonist of the American narrative, and I'll end it on this point, I promise. There is some hope, because when I see what's happening in America, and if you're a student of American history, what's happening right now to American Muslims, to Sikhs, to Arab Christians, to Iranians, is just a remake. This has happened before in the past, right? The boogeyman happens to be American Muslims. In the past, it was Irish Catholics, it was Jews, Japanese Americans, African Americans. In fact, it's still African Americans. 10 years ago, it was gays and lesbians, Eastern Europeans. World War II was Japanese Americans. Tag Europe, now it's American Muslims. The way to change the discourse and the way to even change both domestic and foreign policy is to change perceptions. And I say that as a person who's just come back having spent several months of the past couple of years traveling in Muslim nations. The one thing they all love, they don't like our foreign policy, they love our culture. And a great statistic is this: the Gallup World Poll of 1 billion Muslims said that, what do you dislike about America? They said two things. They said, we dislike the hypocrisy of your values compared to your foreign policy. And they said, we dislike the disrespect that you show Islam and Muslims in your media. That's pretty profound. It was the second thing that they said. So they're paying attention. However, what's encouraging, they said, what do you love about America? They said they love our values, they love our freedom, they love the fact that we have education, they love our technology. And when I've traveled around all the Muslim nations, they actually realize that they like Americans. They want us to know their story, they want to know your story. And sometimes the best medium is through culture. Because kids these days, they don't have a picture of Mitt Romney or Boehner on their wall. If they do, pretty dorky kids. No offense if your kid has a poster of Boehner and Romney. But they have, for better or worse, Bieber, or Brady, right? Or who else? Peyton Manning, or Brad Pitt. You have the cultural creators who influence the way we dress, the way we talk, and culture helps shape and reshape perceptions and ideas. So the Muslims have to emerge as the protagonists of their stories. If we don't tell our stories will be told to us by others. I have talked for way too long. Forgive me, I'm done for the day. Thanks so much.
So I will use a mic because I'm kind of recovering from a cold. So if you can't hear me, just yell. That was actually great because it's a great transition into what I'm getting ready to talk about. Well, first, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Nabil, for putting this very important conference on. I work at the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a policy and advocacy organization that's based in Los Angeles and also has offices in Washington, D.C. and in New York. And I work as the Hollywood Liaison. So I'm going to give you a brief background about what I do so that we can hear from Q and then hear from you guys, because I'm really interested to hear what you guys have on your minds. So 20-odd years ago, when Salam al-Maryadi, the president of MPAC, started the organization, he recognized that it was really important to recognize people in the community, in the American media landscape, who were getting the story right about Muslims, because they were few and far between at the time. So he started the Media Awards, and we are now celebrating, I think next year we'll be celebrating our 22nd, 23rd, I should know this, Media Award. In the early days, we honored people like Spike Lee for Malcolm X. We even honored Morgan Freeman. If you all, who here has seen Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves? And do you remember his character? He played, it was Azim, and he was a Moor who accompanied Kevin Costner on his travels. And it was a small, when I look back and I think about the fact that we gave him a role, because he said, he had a few lines, and he said something about Islam being good, or something like Islam is a peaceful religion, and we were like, yay, let's give him an award, that's great. We've come a long way since then, although we do have a ways to go. Now we actually have a nomination process, and we do screeners and try to decide, okay, what is really impactful, what really hit the American community, what resonated with them, and we honor those folks. So in recent years, we've honored people like Michael Moore and Morgan Spurlock and Alec Baldwin. A few years ago, we honored The Good Wife. We've honored Wajahat, right? Yeah. Yeah, we did. He received our first Emerging Muslim Artist Award, and does this work? Okay. And yeah, so that's kind of like that's how we started with our Hollywood work. But then since then, we started getting scripts from people every so often saying, we have a Muslim character appearing in our show. The first one I recall was Seventh Heaven. They had like a Muslim family, and they wanted MPAC to review the script and give feedback. So we did. We gave our notes, and they were very receptive. And every so often that would come our way, and we'd be really excited because that doesn't happen. Especially with artists. Most artists are don't mess with it's artist integrity. This is how I want to tell the story, and so it's kind of an uphill battle for us. And so at some point we had to decide, okay, we need to create a full-time department that deals with Hollywood. Right now, before then, we were dealing primarily with government and media, but our Hollywood work was sporadic. Then came the show 24, and you guys all remember 24. And there was a very interesting and problematic plot line in 24. And the folks at MPAC made a decision at that time that they were going to actually reach out to Howard Gordon, the showrunner for 24, and just introduce the organization and kind of let him know that what you're doing might not be so cool. He was actually really receptive to the feedback that we gave him. And took a different course of action with the show. So that was a successful story on our side, so much so that the notorious Islamophobes who Wajahat writes about in Fear Inc., which you all should really pick up a copy of, it's an excellent resource, they came out and said that MPAC has infiltrated Hollywood. Yeah, and which we always take as a compliment. They were, every time somebody writes, a blog post about our president or our senior advisor, we're like, yay, look, you're so popular. So fast forward, and these projects, they kind of roll in. We decided we don't want to be watchdogs on our end. We're not gonna. We decided we don't want to be out there like, screening the televisions and the film screens and going after people and say, you're bad and you're good. And we, for many reasons, which we can get into in the Q&A. But then we also saw, let me say this. They brought me on. I was working for a long time in just a consulting capacity, and then they got the money to hire me, and they hired me. And I really, sat there and thought about it for a very long time. It's like, what is the need for the Muslim community? I myself have a background in art. I did go to law school. I also went to acting school, and everyone in my family is a filmmaker, an artist, and my whole social circle are composed of Muslim artists. So I've been very fortunate to be keen on the needs of Muslim artists. And I realized that was really kind of like the missing link, is that there's not a place, there's not a resource that brings Hollywood together with Muslim artists in a way that can connect them. And that really became my role. And that's what I've been really working on doing, is knocking on doors and saying, hey, we're here and we have access to a lot of talent. We've recently come up with, we're developing a database right now of Muslim artists. We just had a really successful event where we invited a whole bunch of Muslim filmmakers and people who work in Hollywood, who are kind of, they're a broad spectrum of folks. There's some folks are like, very conservative Muslims. Some are like secular Muslims. Some are, and we don't care either way. Our thing is, the more Muslims, the more people who have firsthand knowledge of an experience, the better. So we brought them all together. We had this really great night at Shy Lounge. You don't know where that is because that's in LA. We were in Hollywood, and we had about 60 people show up, all people, like working folks in Hollywood. Many of them knew each other, a lot of them didn't, but they were very excited to meet one another because they were like, finally, I've been looking for, a cameraman to accompany me. I'm going to Saudi Arabia. I need somebody who speaks Arabic. And it was just really like this great moment for us because we were like, okay, we had this, our wheels spinning, like we need something like this. We need to get these folks together, and boom, it happened. And now, we have actually a community of people. And that's really been like the most rewarding part of the work that I do as a Hollywood liaison is when I can meet the diversity executive at CBS and then say, you know what, you're hiring, I know the perfect person for you, and introduce them to that person. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about our Young Leaders Summit, because that to me, I think that program that exemplifies the potential of the Hollywood Bureau and kind of like where Muslim youth are going and where their heads are at. So every year, MPAC puts on 3 summits. Government in DC, media in New York, and Hollywood in LA. And the first year that we put it on, and the program is that a bunch of people come from all over North America, from Canada, East Coast, everywhere. We gave them a intro filmmaking course, crash course in filmmaking. Here's a camera, you're the director, you're the screenwriter, and you're the actor, go. And they spent a day doing that. The next few days, they went around literally meeting people who work in Hollywood. Agents, lawyers, actors, directors, producers, writers, documentary filmmakers, editors, everybody. And I want to share 2 observations with you. Before the summit, when I was interviewing young people, and this was, we just completed our 2nd year of the Hollywood Summit. This happened both years. I would interview them, and the first question is, so why do you want to come to the summit? What is your interest in Hollywood? Why do you want to come to the summit? 9 out of 10 times, their answer would be the same. It would be, I want to represent Islam. I want to tell the story of Muslims in a way that hasn't been told before, which is unique when you think about it, because most people, their answer is because I'm an artist and I want to tell, and I have always wanted to do this. They were very specific about wanting, like, this need to tell their story. And the second part of that is their medium was always the same. Their medium was, I want to be a documentary filmmaker. And I had to deal with that both years and actually like have a discussion around it, and I anticipate that it's going to keep being like this for a few years, where I had to kind of break them down and say, well, is it because you think that that's the only way? Or what is it? And sure enough, in conversations with the delegates, it would come out that they would say, I don't know that the other way is an option for me. I don't know that storytelling, fiction narratives are an option for me because my community doesn't really do that. And this is the first time I'm in a space where I'm actually being encouraged to do that. And I was so touched by the end of our first summit because there was this young woman who came out from Maryland, and she was kind of quiet. She was one of the more conservative young ladies who was there, and she was kind of quiet the whole time, but she wanted to be a comedy writer. And we actually got to introduce her to a comedy writer, Muslim comedy writer named Samir Gardezi, who wrote for Modern Family and now writes for Goodwin Games, also wrote for Aliens in America. And they exchanged information, and she's come a long way since then. Just opened herself up. But that whole week, I was just like, I was feeling like, gosh, I'm not getting through to her. This program isn't getting through to her because she wasn't talking. And it wasn't until she sat down with, we had a session with our senior advisor, Dr. Meher Hathout, who some folks would say that he has a pretty progressive approach to Islam, whatever that might mean, I don't know. But he explained to them that, you know, you have to stop looking at this industry as a taboo industry for you. This isn't the entertainment industry. This is you working to showcase your art and to present beauty and the beauty of Islam, however, whatever that means to you, to the public. And that registered with her. That's when it clicked for her. And when we were having our debrief at the end of the week, she was like, she shared with us, she's like, you know, I was totally judgmental about you guys when I showed up here. You know, I come from a conservative Muslim community. All the women wear hijab, and we don't do these kinds of things. Like it took a lot from my parents, and that, by the way, was there's another obstacle with the Hollywood Summit, is getting the young people will apply and they'll get into the program, and then they'll often drop out at the last minute because their parents aren't buying their tickets out there. And that's another struggle for us. But she was confessing. She was like, you know, I came here and I had my judgments about you guys. I kept wondering the whole time, where is the Islam here? I don't see Islam anywhere here. And by the end of the summit, she met with Dr. Hathout, and they had the session about Islam and art. And then they also met with this man named manager named Saul Guy, who is the manager for a rapper named Kanan, if you've heard of him, who's a Muslim rapper. And Saul gave this really good inspirational talk about how he uses his career to further social causes, and how he's been able to get millions of dollars into Africa and just all this really great stuff. And she was like, it wasn't until I talked to those people that I realized that I've been closed, like my perspective has been narrow, and my community's perspective is narrow on what the potential is for us to engage in this industry. There's a plethora of options, and I only thought that I had to go, you know, the Britney Spears route, or the, you know, is that a dated reference? I'm sorry. I'm notorious for dated references. Oh, Lady Gaga, yeah. Or Lady Gaga. Justin Bieber, right? He's still popular. So yeah, you know, I won't say much more, but I just, you know, I guess along the lines of what Wedge is saying is that, you know, we're just on the cusp of realizing what we can do, because we have not been involved on that level. I went to law school, you went to law school, and I had to like lie to my parents and tell them I was like hanging out with my friends and like studying or working at coffee shops when I was, or like reading at coffee shops when I was in acting school, you know? And I'm a grown woman. But that's just the reality of the situation, you know? It's an uphill battle for us, and we have to deal with our like cultural baggage, and then trying to negotiate, you know, our faith, and you know, how much of it do I have to sacrifice? And then you realize at the end of the day, it really is what you want it to be. You make the experience you want to make, but that's not that's a personal journey, right? So like, my job is to take those young people and introduce them to those who've already realized that, and kind of like, and just have them say, okay, just chill out, and you can totally be yourself, and you can do this, and you can, you know. So I'm excited. I'm excited because I know that there's so many stories in them, and I noticed it on Facebook, you know, like some of yesterday, one of my delegates, she uploaded this video, and she goes, "Why, I just found thousands more of these in my room. Where have the, you know, like these little tiny like videos that she would take." And she's like, "I'm gonna share the ones that I think are cool." And I mean, I know that's like nothing, but that's huge, because when I was interviewing her, her parents were telling her, you know, you should go to the other summits because those are more realistic career options for you. You wear hijab. I don't know what you think you're going to do in Hollywood. So I'll leave it there and look forward to hearing from you guys.
Hey, my name is Qasim, Qasim Basir. A lot of people call me Q. In fact, most people that know me don't even know my name. But it's cool, it's all right. So whatever you want to call me, it's up to you. It doesn't really. I have an incredible belief in the power of media and imagery. And what I'm doing, I make films. I'm a writer-director of films. And over the last decade, because he's went into the whole history, so I'm not even gonna go there. He broke it down pretty good for you guys. But over the last 11 years, I saw something so disturbing happen. Because I was born and raised Muslim. I'm also African American. And throughout my entire life, I've been discriminated upon because of being African American. I used to work at Kroger's. It's a grocery store. And I would go to get carts, and like people would lock their doors as I'm walking by their car. Like, oh yeah, because I'm definitely gonna jack you while I'm going to get carts. Walking home at college, it would be a girl that's walking towards me who would cross the street because she's on the same side of the street as me, and I'm like, wow, because I definitely go to the same school as you. And I don't know, it's just, I've built up these, so it's like at times I have to worry about this person worrying about me, you know, and it still happens. I've always been pulled over multiple times. I don't have many tickets, but I've been pulled over tons of times. I was pulled over 2 weeks ago in Hollywood and was made to get out of my car and do the drunk test and all that, just because he wanted to. Either way, I've seen all this before, you know. I've seen the discrimination before. It's been a part of my life, my entire life. I want to say something about it, because when you talk about the images that people have seen, like he described, of Muslim, there's a kid in Nebraska or something who has never known a Muslim person, but his only exposure has been through the media and the films. And then, you know, every time he sees it, and if you consider the most prominent face of Islam over the last decade has been Osama bin Laden. That's major, you know. And so this kid, throughout his life, this is all he sees. And maybe one day he goes to the airport and then he sees someone that looks like those people, and he's like, oh my God. And he's afraid. And you almost can't blame him, you know. It's not like he actively was seeking was trying to be afraid or actively trying to discriminate. It's just the course of his life, you know, and it becomes so. It is my job, and people like me, it is our job to put images out there that are different than that, and to put images out there that say we're human beings too. We love, we feel, we laugh, we cry. Because you do not see that. You just don't. They're like he described, the villains, the terrorists. They're angry, they're mean. But when do you see a mom, you know, just hugging her son, or some kids playing? I mean, this normal stuff that you see from everyone else, you just don't see it. And this is part of what I'm trying to accomplish. And if you consider, let's just talk about the African American narrative and the way we were perceived, I don't know, 40 years ago, 30 years ago. And then Spike Lee starts coming out with films that show something different. And as does John Singleton, and The Cosby Show comes out, and A Different World, showing African-American students in college, in a black college, talking about real issues, and people are like, who are these people? Because all I thought you guys were was criminals and athletes. Like, who are these people? And I believe, it is my belief that without all that, we don't have Barack Obama today. That is how powerful it is to me. Because these people who would have never otherwise been able to see these images or had only seen the negative or exploitative images now get to see young black people in college, like intelligent and you know, it's a whole nother world, and this is the path that we're on. This is the path that I'm on, and not to say that every one of my films will be about Muslim people, because they won't. But I will certainly try to include Muslim characters as normal people, you know? Somebody might have a friend named Muhammad, and it's not a big issue, you know, because that's real life. That's real life here, and that happens here, and we just don't get a chance to see it. So I don't really have so much to say, because I feel like I'm like coming after him. I'm just like, but you know, I'm basically letting you know what I do, why I do it, and if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask. Thank you.
So before we, never used one of these before. So before we start taking questions, I just wanted to say a few things just to add on to what everybody has said here, which is to think about the fact that there's been about 1,300 years of really harsh images about Muslims, especially Muslim men. And so one of the things that I've done in my work is to look at a particular type of image, which is a particular class of images, which are images of Muslim men and sometimes women as non-humans, okay? And so this starts very early on, before Islam even arrives in Europe, before Christians have even seen Muslims. They are already identifying them with the Antichrist, and that these must be beasts, right? And so in the first couple hundred years of these images, we have a cohabitation, which I mentioned, between anti-Semitism, medieval anti-Semitism, and medieval Islamophobia, where there's these images of black Saracens, of kunocepali, which are dog-headed men, and some other images which are identified as both Jews and Muslims. This does not stop. The character Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, that is a hybrid character. That character is a very, very famous anti-Semitic character. He also has Turkish blood running through his veins, and that makes him more monstrous. And so I think one of the things to kind of think about with this issue of representation is there's a really long history here of really bad imagery, and it hasn't stopped. I mean, we can look at the film 300, right? How are Persians portrayed in that film? They're portrayed as, well, for one thing, they're identified with darker skin, because there's always been this tendency to identify the Muslim, especially the Muslim male, with bodily difference, right? But they're also identified as deformed monsters, right? And if you've seen that film or if you've read the graphic novel, you know that. So I just kind of wanted to add this into the conversation so that we all, you know, understand and recognize that there's this really long history that's quite painful, and it hasn't really let up very much. And I think we can now turn it over for questions.
I guess it's particularly towards Q. I really appreciated your film, and one of the things I liked about it was the diversity that's shown of Muslims. I don't know if this is Okay.
It's mostly for a camera, that's why.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
is the diversity of Muslims that's shown, and I'm kind of curious, and anyone can answer this, what role you think non-Arab Muslims in America play in this storytelling, because I think that's also something that's not shown as much. So that's
Well, for me, ignorance is bliss, right? So a lot of times, people who are discriminatory towards Muslims don't necessarily differentiate between someone who's Arab or Southeast Asian or, you know, light-skinned African American who's wearing a hijab. It's just, they sort of discriminate based upon the fact that they are Muslim. So to me, I don't believe there's a drastic difference in that factor. I could be wrong, but it's just, like, I remember my sister's best friend, her name is Nadia. She's about her complexion. She's African American, and she wears a hijab. And someone after 9/11, it was like 2002. Someone like literally tried to hit her with a car, and she had to jump out of the street. And as she jumped off onto the side, fell down, scraped her knees up, they like yelled this discriminatory slur to her. And my sister and her friends made a pact. They decided not to go anywhere alone. So that, I mean, she didn't leave the house again for weeks after this, but they started going to the grocery store together. Everything they would make sure they did together. So for me, it's like they might not have known whether she was Arab or Pakistani or whatever. They're just like, well, she's Muslim. So, and there's tons of diverse. Like he said, it's the most diverse religion in America, and that was natural to me in the film. It wasn't for me to say, oh, I definitely need to specify. That's been my life. You know, my Muslim friends have been Hispanic, African American, Arab, Pakistani, all kinds.
I think the problem, as you know, is Arab has become synonymous with Muslim for decades, much to the chagrin, of course, of many Arab Christians. I mean, many of the Arab Americans who came here, the wave of Arab American immigration was Arab Christians. Many Syrian Americans and Lebanese of Christian background. So obviously, I mean, there's a joke amongst the minority communities was in the, like 2001, 2002. Everyone's like, we're Arab Christians, we're not Muslims. They're Muslims, we're Arab Christians. Or it's like, hey, we're Sikh, they're Muslims. And now we've kind of, in a strange way, have had to make this multicultural coalition of the willing, realizing that, thank you, I'll take that. Realizing that it's not just a Muslim problem, like Islamophobia, for lack of a better term, it's a loaded term. It's not just a Muslim problem, it's an American problem, right? And it's not just an Arab problem or a South Asian problem, right? Because, you know, who knows the motivations of Wade Phillips, the gentleman who killed those, Sikh Americans. But, you know, the first casualty post 9/11 was of a Sikh man. And they thought he was a Muslim. And so I think also it's imperative to divorce that narrative that Arab equals Muslim, Muslims equals Arab, because Q's Muslim, African American. I'm Muslim, I'm Pakistani American. Deana, Egyptian American, and so forth. And white converts, and so forth. And I think, again, when you see the American Muslim identity, it's by far the most racially diverse religious group. So it's also a test for American Muslim communities to broaden the tent of American Islam and to include within our narratives those whom we might not be comfortable, I think, trotting out as a Muslim, right? Because even like Deana was saying, American Muslim artists have a tremendous burden within our communities because we're oftentimes asked to portray the perfect vision of Islam. So we always have to be avatars of perfection. And that means for a woman, it's always like hijab, the head covering. And so I got heat because the mother in my play doesn't wear hijab. So in like 2004, 2005, we did a stage reading. Someone's like, there is a Muslim woman on stage without hijab. I'm like, well, first of all, the actress is Hindu American. And second of all, the character doesn't wear hijab, so what are we going to do? Or again, to conform to the American misperception is the authentic Muslim is the Arab man in a thobe with a beard. So they say Q, you're like, you're not Muslim. Well, they look at me and they go, if I have like a beard, they might sound Muslim. But like, right now they're like, you're, the taxi cab driver. What's going on? And so the only way to change it is to, I think, have more protagonists emerge that reflect this diversity. And also, I think to tap into rich American history, I mean, I make a mention of this, and all the Americans, after I say this, they go, oh yeah, like the person who was chosen to light the torch in the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, it was Muhammad Ali, right? African American and Muslim, with the most Muslim-y name, Muhammad Ali, chosen by America to represent American values and the American spirit. And sometimes you have to remind America about this, and when you say that, they go, oh yeah. And also, not only that, but just the power of storytelling. I mean, I think myself, Q and Deana have all these similar stories where in the professional capacity even, people are like, oh, I don't know a Muslim. They're like, dude, I'm Muslim. Oh yeah, but I'm not talking about your type of Muslim, I'm talking those other Muslims. Right, we get that all the time. And again, the only way to really fix it, I mean, Q touched upon it, Deana did, I did as well, is like, it's like this, it's very similar to what you look at gays and lesbians in the 80s and 90s. I'm from the Bay Area. And if you would have told me 10 years ago, swear to God, that the number 1 daytime talk show host would be an out lesbian woman married to a woman, I would say you're crazy. It would never happen. I said, never. 1,000 years, this will never happen. And especially for those who are old enough, I don't know if you are, I'm an old man now. 1997, when Ellen did come out, she was called Ellen Degenerate. Her career was destroyed. I mean, just, she was ruined. Fast forward now, the number 1 daytime talk show host, the person who's won all the Emmys, is Ellen DeGeneres. And what we've seen, especially in the last 15 years, is, you know, LGBT community, aside from political gains and legal gains, a really concentrated, intelligent, sophisticated effort to show mainstream diverse stories. Angels in America, Laramie Project, Will and Grace, emerging from, I mean, when I was growing up, the stereotype of the gay male was predator. Like pornographic, you know, child predator. That was the gay male. And you challenge that misconception through mainstream portrayals of movie, TV. I'm certain that it took about 2 decades, but you had the TV shows, the movies, the plays, the teachers. Slowly but surely, the mainstream perception allowed more and more people to be more open, allowed more and more people to say, oh, my neighbor is LGBT, my relative's LGBT. And I think that's what we might see, like Muslims in the Mountain West. Those people might be closeted with their Muslim identity. You know, I mean, it's unique. We have unique problems. We have unique, you know, successes. But it's the same thing of when the boogeyman is seen as the neighbor, it becomes more familiar. I hope I was able to answer your question.
Question?
Hi, thank you all for coming. That was very good. I was wondering, as you said, we have a history of kind of demonizing the other. First Catholics and the Irish and African Americans and now Muslims. Do you think kind of normalizing the idea will be enough to move Muslims out of the position of villain, or will we have to wait for someone else to take that position?
I believe we always come out on top of this, you know, in America. I believe in America and Americans. My issue is that it just keeps happening, you know, like, don't we get it by now? Like, we've done this to everyone. And it's, how many times do we gotta do this? So I don't know when it's gonna end or how it's gonna be normalized, but I believe it will. I would hope sooner than later. I would hope that from all the lessons, I mean, from this country's inception, with the Native Americans and us, and you know, it's happened from the beginning. So like, why don't we get it by now? And that's my thing. Like, I didn't think America would buy it when Bush came on TV. It was like the Muslim terrorists, the Muslim extremists, and married those words. It should have never happened ever, but it did. And now you can't say one without thinking of the other. But I didn't think Americans would buy it, but we did, and we're still on that path. So like for me, it's like I don't know. I don't know who's left. What are you? old people? Like, who's left? So I don't know when it will end, but well, let's just go like default black people. I don't know, but it will, and I believe in this, and that's why I love this country, and that's why I believe in this country, because I know it will.
So, okay. My vantage point is a little bit like less optimistic only because of where I'm situated in my job right now and kind of like the things I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Probably before the shooting of the Gurdwara a few months ago, I would have had a little bit more hope. So Q brought up Bush marrying Muslim with terrorism, and that actually served a pretty good political function, right? Because then everyone was like, yeah, you're right, and we should go to war with them, whoever they are, right? So we have to remember that, like, these labels serve people. They serve people with agendas, and these agendas are you know, they're very well funded and well, you know, they have reinforcement. Similarly now, I think that there's a lot of stuff going on geopolitically, domestically. We have an election coming up. Our, you know, Muslim president, people don't want to, I'm kidding, people don't want to see him reelected, and there's been a surge of hate crimes against the Muslim community, against the Sikh community, and then that film didn't help. That stupid film. Can I say about that film what particularly just like anecdotally bothered me? The guy who made that film, I swear to God, not only is he Egyptian like me, he lives down the street from my house. I know his house. That was like the last straw for me. I was like, and you have the nerve to live right down the street from my house? So, you know, when that whole thing popped off a few weeks ago, we had a slew of reporters come to MPAC. We held a press conference at the office. We had a press conference in front of City Hall with the leadership, the Coptic leadership of the West Coast, which was historical, by the way. With Dr. Maher Hathout, our senior advisor, Egyptian American, and Coptic leaders were, you know, addressed the media saying, you know, denouncing the film and denouncing the violence that resulted. And I was doing interviews, and I had these like moments where I was like, oh my God, we're really here again, because I was actually answering questions. Why are Muslims so angry? You know, I was answering that question again, and I was like, wait, I answered that question already 10 years ago, and I thought we were past that, but there is still that narrative that's being perpetuated. You know, when you turn around, when you say, and I was sharing this with Nabil yesterday. So we had this press conference, 40 media outlets. The LA Times is across the street. I can see the LA Times building from where I'm standing at the press conference. The next day, in the LA Times, or a few days later, in the LA Times, there was a letter to the editor asking where were the Muslim organizations condemning the violence. And we called them and we said, you know, why, how did this happen? How, when we can see, you guys should just peeked out your window and saw us out there, you know? And their answer was like, you know, these things happen. These things happen, and but clearly it works. That's a narrative that helps people advance their agendas. It helps people sell newspapers, it helps the 24-hour news cycle have something to talk about, you know? And I think that to kind of try to answer your question, I don't think I have an answer for you. I think that what is left, I do think that storytelling will help a lot. I think storytelling will help a lot. I think that good stories, like really good stories. We were talking earlier about Homeland, and I haven't seen the show, but I've heard some people say that it's there are moments in the show that are just like very like problematic, and I've talked to my friends who are like, a lot of them are pretty liberal, and they're like, yeah, the show does have problems. It does play into certain stereotypes, but it's so good. The writing is so good, and I think that that's what we're competing against, and it's going to take time. And I really certainly hope that nobody does replace Muslims, because it's like not a fun place to be at all.
Thank you.
I think we have
Sorry,
okay, go ahead.
I'm so how in the world do you keep going? I mean, a lot of this, pardon my language, bullshit is really, I'd be really frustrated with it. And I am, as someone who is, and I am very supportive of my Muslim friends, but sometimes I'm just like, you gotta be kidding me. So what motivates you to keep going in this fight?
I think about people like Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, all these people who literally died for what they believed in the face of people telling them they're going to die. And that's hard. That is hard. This here, yeah, it is. It is. But no one's like throwing rocks through my window with fire with my kids in the room. Like, no one's doing that. And I feel like we all have a purpose here on this earth. We're either moving towards or further away from it. I feel like this is mine. I feel like, based upon the course of my life and how things have taken place, and I'll tell my story a little later after the screening, how I got here is, I feel this is what I'm supposed to, this is why I'm on this earth. And the stuff that comes to me is not me in the room, right? Oh, this is all me writing this. I feel like this is from God, and I'm just a vessel to put it out there. And if it continues, then great. If I'm led to do something else, that's good too. But that's why, for me.
I'm Pakistani American of Muslim descent, so the way to move forward is to call myself pre-partition Indian, monotheist. I'm just kidding. No, I mean, thank you. I'll be here all week. Don't forget to tip Nabil. No, I mean, look, it gets exhausting, right? I mean, what we call ourselves sometimes, the people, especially people like myself, unfortunately, we've entered the commentary space. So anytime some person does something crazy, I always say that we're asked to be firefighter Muslim. And when you're always busy fighting fires, it gets draining after a while. It's like, I would like to build a garden instead of fighting fires all the time. And so there is something that as I get on the years and get gray hair, and I'm like, man, this is, you do have these moments of doubt, or I do at least. As we say in Arabic, the waswasas, the whispers, like, why am I doing what am I doing? I should have been a corporate attorney. I would be balling out of control with a BMW, and all the people in my community would look at me as a success, and instead I wasted away my 20s pursuing this fruitless goal of telling stories. F my life. Oh my God, where is Marty McFly's time machine? If I could only go back in time, I would do everything different. I had this thought on the plane. And this happens from time to time. Like, from time to time when I'm exhausted, I do have these, I would be lying to you otherwise, right? And other people look at me like, oh man, you have a really glorious life and you have success, and I've been very grateful. And I am very grateful. Like, I don't take any of this for granted. Any opportunity, speaking engagement, any trip, because I know how many people are out there who want to be like Q, just to have a movie produced, or to have a play just produced once. A lady came up to me, she's in her 50s, she goes, I've been on this journey 30 years, and you're 30 and you have your play published. Wow, that hits me. It was just a white lady, no one Muslim, right? So I'm in a role which I don't take for granted as a storyteller, that if I write something, there's an audience that's receptive to it, and I have the responsibility, because there is power here, to quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, to push things forward in a positive way. Like I write an article, and say The Guardian, it gets published, I'm sitting there in my little, room writing it. I travel to Australia, someone says, oh, Wajahat Ali, I really liked your article. I went to Singapore 3 months ago. There's this lady, I've never met this woman. She says, she wrote me this beautiful, handwritten note. She says, you're one of my professional models. You helped me reconcile my Pakistani, Singaporean, Muslim identity through your writings. So that hits you. How can it not? I went to Malaysia after Singapore. A guy said I had a schizophrenic breakdown almost because I couldn't reconcile my identity with Islam. People like you and your friend, through your writings, I said, oh, there's a way to reconcile it. So you realize, it wakes you up. It sobers you. That makes you realize the small words that you put out there, with the best of intentions, not knowing if they make any dent, do inspire people halfway across the globe. And every time when I have these moments of doubt, which happen more often than I like to admit, there's always this little episode that comes in my life that kind of defibrillates the passion. And it makes me realize that, as Qasim said, not to be melodramatic, the whole question of purpose and time. Time is valuable, time is precious, we have limited time. What am I doing with the time that I have? How much time do I have left? I don't know, but I have to make the most of my time. Where am I most valuable in this earth? Is it as an attorney? I didn't think so, so I left behind potentially a baller career to pursue the life as a pauper playwright. And you see that inspire people. Even when it comes to Muslim kids, when we did the play in New York, you put on the play, and your first job as a storyteller is to entertain audiences. Like I said, I write by us for everyone, global multicultural audience. I went to an all-boys Catholic school where I was a token Muslim, token Pakistani. My friends were not Muslims and Pakistanis. So when I tell stories, I just don't tell for Muslims or Pakistanis. It's for all of you guys, right? And then you see a kid comes up to you and says, I've always wanted to be a storyteller. My parents wanted me to be a doctor. I took them to your play, and now they're allowing me to take playwriting classes. And you're like, holy crap, there's a lot of power. And as we were saying also, so in the global scale, you realize when an Innocence of Muslims documentary comes and it reverberates globally, 24 people die, and you're placed in a position for whatever reason, God, fate, luck, serendipity, to help influence a discourse towards something better, then again, to quote Spider-Man, with that power comes that responsibility. And it just energizes me. And finally, I just do it, why do you do what you do? I think most writers, I ask most writers, why do you write? And most people say, why do you breathe? I don't know. I was just doing this when I was a kid. We did improv comedy as a kid. I don't know why. It was fun. My friend and I took a 12-pound camera. Anyone kid of the 80s? Yeah. Remember those 12-pound cameras? Used to paralyze us? That's how we made our movies. Why do we do it? I don't know. It was just fun. Try to make your friends laugh during lunch. Try to write stories. So we're lucky that I think all of us here are being paid for essentially following our passions, which regardless of race or ethnicity or religion, puts you in a very exclusive, lucky, fortuitous group of people on this earth. I hope I was able to answer your question.
They both summed it up beautifully. I would just add, for me personally, I have been accused multiple times of being a hippie love child, just flower child,
You are.
And I am, and I've come to embrace it. But really, my personal philosophy is that, and actually took this from a film, from Malcolm X. There's this powerful scene where Elijah Muhammad presents Malcolm with a cup and it's clean water, and he pours ink in it, and it turns black. And he says, if you give people an option, what do you think they're going to want to drink, the pure water or the dirty water? They're going to want to drink the pure water. And that has really kind of informed my path in a lot of ways, because I believe that when you present people with beauty or ugliness, most people are going to choose beauty. And if they're going to choose ugliness, it's because they're responding to their own hurt and their own pain. And that needs to be addressed too. And I feel like all of us sitting on this panel in some way have a role to play in diminishing the ugliness and propagating the beauty. And that's really what it comes down to.
All right. Thank you all. This is really, really refreshing. And I had a secret agenda, you know, behind inviting you, and you just did beautifully, because you came here and you really tried to say exactly what I've been trying to say through the Muslims in the Mountain West project. It's unfortunate that not many people actually could hear the counter narrative. We talked yesterday a lot about the pervasiveness of this narrative about Muslim rage, about, you know, sort of the negativity around Islam, and it's also interesting that out of these events that we've put together, the journalists decide to come only to the ones that are related to, you know, sort of issues, the big issues. Like yesterday for the Muslim rage panel, journalists showed up. I don't see any journalists around here, but we can amplify these voices, and thank God that we have a video camera right there, and there is something called the internet, and we could put this on the internet. We can amplify your voices and do it in a way that I think more people around the globe would be able to hear what you just said. It's interesting, through the project itself, we found some interesting stories, and I promise I will let you go to the reception and eat. Where we found stories going all the way to the 1500s. Actually, the story of Islam in America is even older than 300 years ago. I mean, here, the first Muslim to have sailed the Colorado River was a Moroccan slave, right? And sort of an interesting story. His name was Estevanicos, but his real name was Mustafa Zamuri. Came from Morocco. When we tell journalists this story, they say, oh, that's a beautiful story, but I don't know what to do with it. Then we told them about the story of Sayyid Qutb, who lived actually just a few miles from here in Greeley. Sayyid Qutb being the sort of the intellectual father of the Muslim Brotherhood. They wanted to just rip that story apart. They wanted to go there because it's the Muslim Brotherhood, because it's the negativity around Islam, and they feel that people would relate to those stories better than the story of some guy who came here and sailed the Colorado River centuries ago. It's just unfortunate that people do not make the effort to hear the counter-narrative. We provide a venue, we bring people from all over to make people listen to these narratives, and they don't show up. And I think it's their loss. And thank you so much.
Well, it's oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you break up the clap. Yeah, it's part. It's the fight, man. You know, this is the part of the fight, and it's never easy when you're at this place because people are. That other narrative is what's being pushed, and that's what people are more interested in now. Like, they want to hear all of this, you know. And once this becomes more popular, which I believe it will, these types of events will have more people. But just like me getting my film out, it was a fight. Like, no distributor wanted to put it out. Like, we literally had to put it out ourselves in theaters and like had people passing out flyers in the streets and because it was that's just where we are right now, and things will get better.
Quality over quantity, quality audience. So
Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you.
Please, and then we'll come back a little later for the screening.
So what time is the screening?
It was supposed to be at 7.
Okay.
So we'll take about 15-minute break and
Okay.
eat, and then we'll come back.